This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic Happy Hour, whose tagline is burning questions, not people. You know, we've been around for a long time now, and we've had many different lineups, and Heretic Happy Hour is only getting bigger and better with guest hosts like Rainn Wilson, David Bentley Hart, John Fugelsang, Candida Moss, Elaine Pagels, and of course, December Rose. 2024 and 2025 are turning out to be our best years yet. So check us out on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Heretic Happy Hour. We hope to see you soon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. This is not church, because you know what? If it was church, you would have left by now. And John and I and maybe Bethany. Bethany's a nice person. She might stay. She would stay just to explain to you that Jesus still loves you, even though, you know, maybe you're walking out of her church. I don't know.
I would. You are correct.
I know you would. Such a nice person. I'm like, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Let's go. And Bethany's like, no, we have cookies. Come back. There'll be an ice cream social later this week. It's going to be great.
Oh my gosh. You are so true.
It's amazing that we've never actually met in person. I feel like we're kindred spirits, you and me. What can I say? But we're here again with another awesome guest, myself and John and Bethany. And this guy is Pastor Campbell. What's your first name, man? How did I miss that? Caleb
Yep,
Campbell. And I swear to God, you're going to have to watch our socials for some video clips, because you're missing out on the vision here. That when we first, no, I mean them, not you. You know what Caleb. You're doing. So I'll introduce him, but then I need to describe what I'm looking at here, which made me nervous when I first clicked onto the stream. I'm like, what the hell did we just get ourselves into? But this gentleman here graduated Summa Cum Laude with a Master's of Art in Ministry from Phoenix Seminary in 2015 and is currently a doctoral student at Fuller Theological Seminary. He has served at Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona since 2006, serving as lead pastor since 2015. He also serves on the board of United Pastors of Arizona, as well as the statewide regional director of Surge Network. He has spoken at events hosted by Acts 29, African American Christian Clergy Coalition, the Surge Network, Grand Canyon University, Converge Arizona, Young Life, and Phoenix Seminary. And he's written a book called Disarming Leviathan, which I am extremely excited to talk about. But before we do that, let me paint the picture, because on my video screen in front of me is somebody plucked right out of a Trump rally. I mean, this guy is amazing. He's got an American flag in the background. Of course, he's got his book there because he's pimping his book out, which I think is amazing. Earlier, he showed us his Trump Bible, but he described it to me, and I'll let him continue to describe it as him being a missionary to a Christian nationalist. And so he's got to look the part. And quite frankly, he's pulling it off huge. So kudos to you, man. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, Caleb?
Thanks. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on. You've done a wonderful job describing the aesthetic of my current space.
Yeah, it is it's visually arresting. Let's just
yes.
Which
That's
I'm sure is what you're going. Of course it is. Yeah. You're a provocateur. I can feel it. You're like, oh, wait till they get a load of me. You're that guy from the was that the Joker from the first Batman? He was like, wait till they get a load of me. Jack Nicholson. All right. Anyway, I'm going way back into the Wayback Machine for all of my references.
You're doing great.
So if you're not at least 50, I don't know, or well versed in early 80s, comic book movies. But anyway, talk to us about yourself a little bit before we get started. A lot of times we ask people about their spiritual background, maybe a little bit about their journey a little bit. Feel free to share whatever you want, if whatever makes you comfortable, man.
Sure. Yep. I grew up, parents kind of took me to church a bunch. It was a really conservative church, and it was out of the holiness movement. So there was a lot of conversation about what you're not supposed to be doing, like don't dance, don't drink, don't smoke, don't watch R-rated movies, like Batman, I think was probably on the list. And in junior high, I was at one of the pastor's houses for some function, and on the media center was a VHS cassette tape of The Terminator, which was rated R. And I, in that moment, thought, this is a lie. Like, they're telling me to do this stuff, but they won't even do what they're telling me to do or not do. And so, I was looking for reasons anyways, but in that stage of my life, I was just like done with God, done with church. I'm like, this is all stupid, what they're saying, they're not doing. I don't think I was smart enough to know what hypocrisy was, but that's kind of what I felt like it was. In high school, fell in with a group of neo-Nazi skinheads and became one myself, and did that for a few years. I didn't go to college after high school, but kind of in that late teens, early 20s part of my life, I started noticing that a lot of what people were talking about in the skinhead movement, white people are master race. If you're blonde-haired and blue-eyed, you're like the pinnacle of humanity, which I was like, I've got both of those characteristics, so easy sell. And I started asking, all right, so where are all the like wealthy, successful, retired skinheads? Everyone that we're hanging out with is like getting shot, going to jail, like leading lifestyles that are not in alignment with what we're all saying. And so very similarly, what was being said and what was actually happening were not in alignment. They weren't congruent. And so just through a variety of what I would consider kind of God-ordained circumstances, I was able to get out of it pretty unscathed and disentangle myself from that movement pretty safely, which is not always the case. And I was floating. The only thing I had going, I had a job, and then I was a drummer in a heavy metal band, and we were looking for a bass player. And so we put an ad in the Phoenix New Times, which this is before Craigslist. So this was a piece of paper newspaper that they would like put outside of restaurants and clubs and bars and record shops. On the back, there was multiple pages called the classifieds, and you would say things like, hey, we're looking for a bass player, I'm the drummer, and you'd leave your phone number. And one day, a woman from Desert Springs Bible Church's band was dialing drummers, and the classifieds called me and said, our drummer canceled, can you come play the drums of the church? And I thought, yeah, I should probably do like good stuff for God or something. I still kind of believed in God, something, but also was just desperately searching for safety, belonging, and purpose. And so I said, sure. So I went and played the drums, and then now I'm the lead pastor.
Wow.
Yeah. Common career path.
So in like Seinfeld parlance, they'd be like, I did this, and yada, yada, yada. Now I'm the lead pastor.
Yep.
You yada, 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 like 25 years of your life. Yeah, yada, yada, yada. That is amazing.
That sounds boring.
Some of that, those coincidences, those things were like, man, if I hadn't just picked up the phone, I still think it's amazing. When I first started with my pastor friend, when he planted a church, he was the first guy I knew that hired a band. And I thought that was uber weird. And so the first like 4 or 5 years of me playing music in this church with him, our bass player was a paid musician who was an atheist. And nice guy, hell of a cool guy, but he's like, I don't believe any of this shit. But hey, they're going to pay me $50 just to play me. It's the easiest music I've ever played. It's not that hard. He's like, they're going to pay me $50 to stand here for 45 minutes. Hell yeah. But that's so cool, man. I love that, that you asked that question. It's kind of like asking that question, like, where are all the old drug dealers, and where are all the old, like this is not a lifestyle that lends itself to longevity, right? Mm-hmm. And so at least you had enough self-awareness to go, yeah, this isn't going anywhere. Nowhere good anyway. So that's awesome. Cool story, man. I love it. So talk to us about this book then. So what leads you into a place where you're now confronting, dealing with this Christian nationalist scourge that would kind of rear its ugly head?
In 2006, I came on staff. So I'd been volunteering for about, I guess a year or two. So they gave me a part-time role, and that became a full-time job. And then throughout that, went to seminary, stepped in a lead pastor role in 2015. So my predecessor, Rick, served there for 30 years. It was a great transition. I still see him every other week. He's still my pastor. And it really was. It's just a killer transition. It was great. The transition, we did the thing, like the ceremony and all that kind of stuff, in September of 2015. And I had watched as our church had been doing things like traditional evangelicalism in the like British sense, right? High view of the Bible, high view of Jesus, personal conversion experience, and social engagement, civic action. And so we had been involved in things like immigration reform. We had been involved in advocating for keeping families together, which this is the land of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. And one of their methods was like basically to create terror for those who are undocumented. And we were active. It was not partisan ever, but it was like, hey, if we believe in like quote unquote family values, then that means like those families too. And so it really was a sense of like, we want to be integrated and have consistency. And these false divisions between red team and blue team, like we're just not engaged in that. We're just going to say what we think is right regardless. And it had been, down the street from about 3 miles from where our congregation meets, Palomino community. It's one of the most ethnically diverse districts in Phoenix. It's where some of the Sudanese Lost Boys got placed back like 20 some odd years ago. Continues to be a lot of refugee resettlement. So refugee resettlement, immigration. Because of my story, we were used to talking about racism and, racial supremacy and how there's equity in the scriptures, not supremacizing. So that was like normal stuff. But it was always like, yeah, I value the Bible. And we believe the Bible so much that we want to talk about things like social justice because that's in the Bible. And we had done that for years to, thumbs up. Like people were not, we were not advocating for candidates. We were not telling people how to vote on a certain thing. And so stepping in like in 2015, I'm like, okay, we'll just keep doing that. Like when we say things like love your neighbor and love your enemy, we mean like putting that into practice kind of stuff. Which I just thought, honestly, and looking back on it, I think I was exceedingly naive. It's just like, I thought that's what we had been doing. And it's just like, let's just keep doing that. And then 2016 happens, 2017. I remember saying things like, we shouldn't put kids in cages. That's not right. Because the president at the time was basically saying, like, if you cross the border illegally, we're going to put your kids in cages. About a third of our youth group at the time were either DACA recipients, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, or were cousins of or siblings of, like in the familiar, like close familiar structure, someone who's DACA. So when the president was saber rattling about arresting all the DACA kids, I was public, like, no, we're not going to do that. And in fact, if we need to use our property to like create a safe haven, we're going to do it. And that was met with your like accusations that I was promoting Marxism, atheism, which is always fun. Like as a pastor, it's like, dude, like maybe the bass player is an atheist, but like I'm the pastor. Like I'm not, like, come on, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe it.
Was this, Caleb, pushback from the wider community or from your actual church community?
Yeah. And this is what was disorienting. This is a great question, Bethany. These were people that I had shared communion with for over a decade. And what was very disheartening and disorienting was people who I sensed or thought, we know each other. We've been around each other forever. I baptized your kids. I buried your dad. Like you've been into my house multiple times. We're in a small group together. Would be coming up to me like in the lobby after a service. And I would do something as innocuous as being like, we need to love our enemies. That means like not seeking their destruction. Like I think is just like Orthodox Christianity. And it would be met with, someone would perceive that I was contradicting one of their currently held political convictions. And so they would be in the lobby with like their finger in my sternum. Hey, don't bring that Marxist crap into the house of God. And I had people tell me that they were going to, leave the church because I had not endorsed their favorite candidate, because I didn't say nice things about who, their preferred candidate, that was received as advocating for the other team. And again, it was like every month, one year, September 11th fell on a Sunday and we didn't make a big to-do about it. Like we said something at like a prayer, like this is a sad day, but like we didn't do like a whole thing. And it was like, why do you hate America? Like what? So it was like 17, 18, 19, it was extremely disorienting. And it was like a steady stream of people who were just like, we're just not going with you. And many of them were throwing grenades on their way out the door, putting me on blast or putting our team on blast. 2020 hits, and weeks after the decision to not meet in person, so this, for us, it was Friday the 13th of March, there was a group of people hosting a live stream protest service on our property, praying for me because I had imbibed a Luciferian spirit of fear. And again, these are people that I know. So I Googled Luciferian. You'll be shocked. It means the devil, like Lucifer. I was like, what's a Luciferian spirit? And so I Googled it. I'm like, I hope I don't have that. That sounds terrifying.
That is shocking.
And it was because they, in their perception, the pandemic was a plandemic. It was planned by the government to get more control. And as a pastor, I had capitulated to the Antichrist government's grab for power. Whereas I thought we were trying to keep, Uncle Jim from dying. Like that was what I thought we were doing. And we were deferring to people who know what like a virus is. I went to seminary, not a very good student. I think I accidentally skipped the day where they taught how to like pastor through a global pandemic because I didn't know what I was doing. And our board was like, we don't know anything about viruses, so we're going to defer like we always do when it comes to safety and health stuff. We defer to people who are smart about it. And then George Floyd was murdered, and we did, I participated in public demonstrations. That was not well received by some who thought that I wanted to kill police. So me wearing a clergy shirt at some of the public demonstrations, the public protests, was translated as Caleb hates the police. We have police in our church. I mean, I was hanging out with some of them downtown when they were on the job, I was so struck by this. And then, the federal election, and it's like same thing. You're not endorsing a candidate because you spirit of fear, liberal, woke. We all know where you stand. That was my favorite one. Assuming I was secretly advocating for not their preferred candidate. But the one that I always love as a theologically conservative evangelical is the accusation that I'm trying to appeal to the godless Dems. And I'm like, do you think anyone cares what I have to I'm struck by it. It's like, what do you think I'm doing? I'm a white suburban Bible church guy. There's no appeal. There's no Hollywood appeal for this guy right here. Don't worry about it. They're not listening. And then January 6th, and I simply said that it was disturbing to see people doing violence in the name of Jesus and at the floor of the Capitol be praying to Jesus. And that is contrary to the teachings of Jesus. Then I listed out teachings of Jesus. And that was for many people the final straw. So for me, it was a steady stream of deeper realizations at how deep the rot went. Relationally, it's hundreds of broken relationships. Part of my counseling at the time in 2021, one of the practices was to walk around a park for a day. And as names of broken relationships would come to mind, I'd journal them down. At the end of the day, I had 300 names. And that was emotionally devastating. Physiologically, I got COVID in June of 2020, shingles in July, and then facial paralysis in August. So it's something called Ramsay Hunt. So the whole right side of my face was paralyzed, similar to Bell's palsy. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, yep, you've got Ramsay Hunt. And he's like, yeah, your immune system's shot. Have you been under any stress lately? and I was like, yeah. And, I got about 90% of it came back, which I'm very grateful for. But I still when I get real fatigued or anxious, this part of my face starts tingling and my right eye will close involuntarily. So I, physiologically, emotionally, relationally is just the worst year of my life, so far. And in 2021, started getting invitations to what some of the people that I pastored at the time called a revival. And so they'd come up to me in the lobby, they'd hand me a flyer and they'd say, Pastor Caleb, there's a revival happening. But the flyer looked like a rally to me. Red, white, and blue. There's, I think, an eagle on it. And, massive crowd and like a speaker on the stage. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. They said revival. This looks like a rally. And so some of our other leaders were getting these invites too. So me and one of our other leaders went to one of the gatherings, and this would have been early 2021, and just terrified by what we saw. It was not a political event. It was a spiritual event. They did multiple worship songs. They did the thing where it's like every head bowed, every eye closed, pray this prayer, slip up that hand thing to receive salvation. They took an offering. They really were hosting a church gathering. And then the leader of the organization, Charlie Kirk, got up on the stage and proceeded to preach. Like he opened with the word of God says, and then was saying things that were, like, in my opinion, so blatantly clear examples of sermonic malpractice. Statements like, Jesus is clear, we have to love our neighbor as ourselves, which is why we have to protect our God-given Second Amendment right to bear arms, because you can't love your neighbor if you can't stop a bad guy with a gun. So we're going to go down and we're going to petition, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh, people can see right through this. This is like poorly done proof texting. Nope. Thousands of people, some of whom I pastored at the time, were raising their hands saying amen and hallelujah. And so that's what got me not only interested in what this movement was, but it started helping me see how all these disparate pieces and expressions of combativeness and polarization were actually tethered together from one, like the same source. And so that got me intrigued in it. And then I began the work of studying it. And that's what started me on this path to writing the book.
Yeah, that was incredible.
The thing is, I can resonate with that to some extent, because I planted a church in 2020.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah.
No way.
Is that right? 20.
Like early?
Oh, yeah.
Like January, February, like before the...
No. Take that back. Late 2019.
Oh, man. So, yeah. Bud.
Right. So
now, can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Did you think about doing a sermon series called 2020 Vision?
I did. Oh, you know what? Now I know it was 2019 because myself and my one of my best friends, who was my co-pastor, we were like, I think we sat down at our weekly. We used to meet once a week, and I'm like, whatever you do not pitch 2020 Vision to me, as I will put you through a wall.
That one is out of style. And then also Contagious Christianity.
Yeah,
I feel like that sermon series you can't do anymore.
Well, it was interesting because we planted this little church. It was just something that, honestly, for me, it was my last ditch effort to stay connected. I was just done. And I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a shot with me running the show, and I'll do it the way I think it should be done, and I want to do it. And if that doesn't work, well, then to hell with it, all of it. Anyway, so we we did really well for the first year. But you said something about, being naive. I was naive as hell, thinking I could start this little progressive, queer affirming, peace, love. We were very, very open about our nonviolent stance and our anyway. So wanted to be very socially active. And what I noticed was that shift that you just mentioned. As we got closer to 2020 and then COVID hit, I lost about half probably half the church membership when we decided to suspend in-person service, because I'm like, I'm just not doing it. I don't know enough about this virus, and quite frankly, neither do you. And it's not going to kill any of us to stay home for a while. And so we did online church for longer than what was recommended until I was ready. And then in the interim, we lost our place to meet, and we were meeting in the gymnasium of another friend's church. And I wasn't going back until they were going back. It was their church, their building, and I respected them enough to say, hey, let me know when you're ready to go back to in person, and we will too. And so I got a lot of people I got that thing of like, we're just tired. We need to meet in person. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, But also, we just lost 100 people last week. Like, dead, never to be seen again because of this virus. And you guys still have your head in the sand thinking this is all fake. The 2020 thing was really weird. January 6th really screwed some stuff up. And I noticed that same turn. I recognized that. I was going to mention too that even in 2015, I was on staff at a church. But I was very, very, at that point, really, really active on social media. Had a good enough size following that I said stuff and people paid attention. And I remember in 2015, late 2015, I could post about Trump. I guess we're going to go ahead and say his name. I could post about him negatively pretty much without consequence. You know, and actually to a lot of my, I need to go show some of my friends their responses because I was like, this guy is conning you. He's not a Christian. He's pandering to you and you're taking it. You're buying it. Don't let him, you know, and they're like, yeah, he doesn't care about Jesus, blah, 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 blah. I can't even say anything now without getting dogpiled by everybody. So that shift went from we're reluctantly voting for this person because, we don't like him, but he's the best. I guess he's the best possible choice to full-throated support on the other side. Like, did you notice that switch? Like this sort of reluctant. Yeah. Like, well, we're going to hold our nose in the voting booth, but now that was switched. Like it's like woohoo rally, right?
I was struck by how many people. I wasn't surprised by how many of the people I pastored voted for the red team. We live in there's a statue of Barry Goldwater down the street from me.
Yeah.
John McCain represented me for my entire life, almost. And so I thought, okay, this is a predominantly conservative area, but they see what's going on and they're going to, still be conservative people, but certainly they're not going to approve of the methods and means of this movement. The dehumanizing speech, the toxic polarization, the fear mongering, the rage. And what I was sadly, what I noticed sadly was that not only was it we're going to be still for the red team, but we will by any means necessary try to maintain a sense of power using the structures of the kingdoms of this world. And, there's like in the book of Galatians, there's this time where Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Like, when the Spirit of God is active, when there's love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, etc. And he says that, and he says those things in contradistinction to like the fruit or the works of the flesh, which is divisiveness, hate speech, greed, etc. And I'm like, I see all those things coming out of the people that I'm pastoring, and they're calling it righteous, which was, disheartening. It's like, no, God wants us to be combative. God wants us to fight the culture war. God wants us to own the libs or, whatever it was. And I'm like, I don't think that we have fully come to grips with just how profoundly radical the teachings of Jesus are. Because it sounds like what we're saying is, well, we're just going to use Jesus to co-sign our current power structure that makes me feel good. And so, again, my argument is not that people should be progressive or conservative. For me as a pastor, that's not my job. However, advocating for that people live the way of Jesus, especially in developing the muscle to carry the distance between you and me. And what I mean by that is the capacity in my own heart and soul to commune with people with whom I disagree and to listen to them say things that I don't agree with without losing my ever-loving mind. That's what I'm trying to do. Spiritual formation, right? Maturity. The capacity to sit in a space with someone and see them as an image bearer of God, not as an enemy combatant in a culture war. And what was disheartening to me was I thought that's what we were all doing because these were many of them mothers and fathers in the faith to me. I learned about Jesus from many of them. And I thought that's what we were doing. And again, for me, it was a thing where, well, what we're saying and what we're doing are not actually in alignment. And so my work over the last few years has been trying to provide Jesus-like methods for engaging with people who've given themselves over to this culture war, Christian nationalist, whatever you want to call the movement, toxic polarization. And noticing, and this is something that I realized that was life-changing to me, is a lot of the things that are coming out of their mouth that I find abhorrent, they believe because it makes sense of something that's going on in the heart. And so if I want to see change, if my hope is to see change in them, I can't just engage them head to head as if sharing facts and opinions is going to change someone. But rather, I want to connect with them heart to heart, which is, mutual respect, operating in good faith, practicing hospitality, etc. And that's actually where I came up with the metaphor for missionary. I know that it's like mission work is controversial, but I do draw a distinction between colonizer and missionary. But good missionaries go in as learners, as students, as hospitable, and the only desire is, I want to live the good news in front of you and invite you to practice that way with me in your own unique way. And I found that that's, at least where I'm at, the only way that seems to work in actually creating some level of restoration in community, at least here.
Yeah. On a less serious note, and I know these guys have questions, so I'm sorry, I don't mean, but just I can see you with a microphone doing a shtick for like the Daily News or for like the Daily Show or something, where you go dressed like you're dressed and you read quotes from Jesus and see how pissed off people get.
Yeah, I've seen people do that.
I can see you do it. Like, hey, have you read this? Kamala Harris said, we should love our enemies. What a woke whore. Yeah, I can just see it. Well, all right, it happens. Yep. That joke fell a little flat. Bethany, you had something to say before I cut you off for that shtick, which was not worth it.
I just wanted to tell you, Caleb, how beautiful your story is, but also how painful it is. And I just wanted to acknowledge the pain that you've been through. And I love how, even though you've been through so much pain, you're still very open to engaging with people that are different thinkers than you, and you're not writing them off, and you're able to still open up your heart and your soul towards them. How do you protect yourself from experiencing the kind of hurt you've felt before? And yeah, like especially as a pastor, and you're still exposing yourself towards pain day in and day out because of the role that you have. So how do you find yourself protected?
So for me, I try to understand the pain or discomfort that I'm feeling in terms of, is this hurt or is this harm? And again, that's just kind of my way of viewing it. I know there might be different perspectives, and I'm certainly no expert, but at least in my experience, like going to the gym, if you go to the gym and you're not sweating, you're not doing it right? Like there's just a certain level of discomfort that you're designed to feel when you're growing and when you're experiencing resistance. So you go to the weight machine and you go to the bench press and you put the bar down on your chest and you push it back up. It doesn't feel comfortable. It hurts, but it seems to be like, oh, this is good. Like this is a good hurt. But if you pull that bar down and like you feel that like sharp pain up your spine, like everything in your body is telling you like, stop, this is doing damage. And just like with my physical body, so too with my emotional being and my spiritual being, like being able to discern which one of these two is this. Because when Uncle Jim is like yelling and screaming about something that I think is abhorrent, I will feel discomfort. It's a burden for me to bear. The question is this hurt or harm? So just navigating, what am I feeling? Being able to name what I'm feeling, like internally, as it's happening, and then discerning, is this healthy for me to stay in this spot? Should I power through, or should I just like press pause? And one of the ways to like jettison out of a conversation that I found really helpful is to say, I love that you care about this so much. You've said a lot of things that I need to think and pray on. Would you give me a week and we'll circle back? What I don't want to do is be like, you're hurting me or harming me, unless they seem to be intending to do so. Because what I don't want to do is create a further wounding through accusation, because they may just be like, I thought you wanted to talk about this thing. And again, I want to notice, I'm talking about this stuff in like good faith conversations where the other person really believes something I think is abhorrent. I'm not talking about abusive situations. That's something very different. And then also I would notice how often Jesus ghosted the homies. So frequently in the Gospels, Jesus is like doing a work and then he's like, I'm going away. And he'd walk up some mountain and just like commune with God. Like he'd be by himself. I imagine he'd be taking naps. And so noticing any work I do in this space, for me, being a missionary to Christian nationalists, it's work. And so I want to be in touch with my body and my mind and my soul. Am I fatigued? Am I holding grudges? Am I deeply anxious about this? And if I am, now's not the time to go talk to this person. It's time for a nap. It's time to commune with the Lord. It's time for, talk to my therapist, whatever it might be. And recognizing I need other people to speak into that as well. And what I've noticed about most cross-cultural missionaries, they always have like a prayer team. And they say things like, hey, next week I'm going down to meet with, so-and-so down the street. Would y'all pray for me? And then I'll circle back and, tell you how it went or something like that. And just knowing that you've got people in your corner when you're in a conversation with somebody, reminding you like that knowledge helps to remind you like, I'm not crazy and I'm not alone, which can help to be an anchor for me when I'm having those conversations.
So then I'm curious about, you expressed how many people in your church have left over the years. And that's just so sad when people leave. I know that for myself, it just breaks my heart. But also sometimes it makes it so the texture, the culture of the church can kind of shift in the way that it needs to shift. Do you feel like your church is more supportive of you at this point with being a missionary? So if they're supportive for you to be the missionary to the Christian nationalists, and there's no longer Christian nationalists that are part of your church in the same capacity as they once were, how do you go out and do that work?
I'm in Phoenix. Yeah, it's not quite hard. So a couple of things, Bethany, you're very wise to notice. So yeah, the culture in that congregation has shifted. The number one pastoral conversation I have gotten over the last 3 years is, Pastor Caleb, what do I do with Aunt Betty? She's yelling and screaming at the kid's birthday party about immigrants invading the country, and I just don't know what to do. She's usually a sweet lady. She gave me my first Bible when I was 12. What do I do? So my work is twofold. One, to do it one-on-one, which I do. Usually go into, events or, hanging out with people. Also, the people I pastor, they're friends and family. Many of them are imbibing this stuff. And when they introduce me, here's Pastor Caleb, it's like, get to meet him that way. And the way that we structure a congregation, and this is kind of like, this is hard to navigate for me. Like I wrote a book. And so if you Google my name, it's connected to the book. So that makes it difficult. However, there's still people in our congregation who are bringing their friends and family. Because from the stage, I'm not saying things like, we're anti-Christian nationalists. So we're actually trying to cultivate a community that creates space for them to see the way of truth more clearly. As long as they're willing to practice, what we're doing together, practicing the fruit of the Spirit, 1 Corinthians 13, love. We regularly say things like, we don't have uniformity of conviction in this congregation. We're centered on Jesus. We're not trying to say, you have to conform with what Pastor Caleb thinks. I change my mind a lot. But what we are committed to is how we're going to be together in this pursuit of Jesus. And so you're invited to that. So if you have a certain political conviction, don't be surprised when the person you're sharing communion with does not share that conviction. And so what we're trying to do is set the table for people to, as the Bible says, have their minds renewed, but without it coming as like a top-down thing, but rather it would be a communal thing that we're actually shaping each other. And so that means that we've got people with BLM hats and MAGA hats at the same table. Now, there's a lot of people who don't want to do that. And so that's not really what our ministry is about. So I get to minister in that way too, like showing and creating spaces around tables where we get to be invitational and hospitable and invite people in. And then we do some more like acute stuff, like we do a thing called biblical, patriotic, no, what's it called? Oh, dang it. Political discipleship. That's what we call it. We've had a few different names where we'll talk about politics more directly. But again, most of that's like how we're going to be with each other when we're talking about politics, not what you're supposed to think about this issue or that issue.
My question would be specifically because these two sides have become so divisive, right? That there is no way to communicate a lot of times. So how do you bring these two groups of people to the same table? I mean, how do you even make that happen?
By connecting, at least this is what we're trying to do. It's help them to see that they can connect on deeper values and then work their way back up the ladder to political conviction. So for instance, the value of safety for our children in our community, we can connect there. Now, how we're going to do that, right? Like one side is like, we need to do this thing. The other side is we need to do this. Okay, well, we're not starting there. We're going to start with what do we think the shared value is? And this is the other thing, John, before we're at the table having that conversation, we're saying we are going to have a conversation about a spicy issue, but we're all going to commit to practicing the fruit of, we call them rules of the road. It's 1 Corinthians 13 and the fruit of the Spirit. So whatever you believe, you're welcome to the table. If you become combative, polarizing, dehumanizing, we're going to have a little chat on the side and say, that's not what we do here. So you're always welcome to the table. And so that for many people, they'll just self-select out of that. Like they don't want to talk to somebody on the other team. But for the ones who do, they want to know, hey, when I come to this table, am I going to get yelled at because I believe this way or I voted this way? And when we can say, you might be, but we're really striving to cultivate a community where we're not yelling at each other. And for the most part, people are not yelling. I mean, we just did one last week and we talked about gender, hell, was it abortion? And again, it's like people in this room are not all agreeing on the policy or the thing, but we are committed to figuring it out together, but being like Jesus to each other. And I've noticed in the Gospels, this is so good. Like in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus calls Simon, Peter, and Andrew, who are like fishermen, Jewish fishermen. The very next place Jesus takes them is to a tax collector's house for a meal. And I could just imagine them sitting there eating with like on plates that was bought with money that was extorted from them.
Right.
And noticing, okay, well, if they could do it, we could do it too. So let's do it.
Yeah.
That's so good. It's like trying to create spaces where we assume good intent from the person on the other side. We're making assumptions of positivity instead of negativity. And I think it's such hard work, but I think it's the work of the gospel. That's like the work of Jesus. So I love that you're doing that.
The problem in the presently polarized Church of America, as I'll speak as an evangelical, is not actually about politics. It's about spiritual malformation. We have inherited a church culture that has valorized the concept of a homogeneous growth unit. What I mean is, many churches are growing up assuming if we could target one group of people, homogeneous, and we appeal everything to that one group of people, we will grow the church. And it worked. It got more people in the church. But what the problem was, the lack of formation came because everyone kind of votes the same and everyone kind of affords the same vehicles and everyone kind of lives in the same area and eats in the same ways. And we were not in our spiritual formation confronted with the reality that someone could follow Jesus and be like on the other side of something than me. And this is now generational. So you see in the evangelical American church a malformation. People, generally speaking, do not have the spiritual muscle to carry the distance between us. And so they just assume, because we're not in conformity to a mental assent to an idea, that you're actually an enemy. Because they just don't have a category for someone who disagrees and still follows Jesus. I mean, you see this all the time, right, on social media. A real Christian could never vote for blah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yikes.
Yeah.
It's like, that lack of imagination speaks to spiritual malformation.
It's a symptom of that larger issue of that homogenization is a result, I think, at least in part, of the fact that many of us grew up in a church we were a part of the dominant culture. And so we don't even know what it's like to sit with people who disagree with us or don't like us, because we grew up in a largely Christian nation, around largely Christian populations. At least they paid lip service to that fact. So we weren't persecuted. We weren't having to answer hard questions. You were a Christian, so what? And now there's this pushback. It seems like there's no ability to face that pushback and deal with the fact that maybe the culture's shifting away from you. I saw that on full ugly display at the Olympics. It was like, how dare somebody in a foreign country put on a display of something that did not either cater to my particular viewpoint or, at least in my estimation, offended me intentionally. And even if that's what happened, and I don't believe it was, but even if all of that was intentional, why was the Christian response to be outraged and not just go, not everyone's a Christian. It's okay. Like I could just turn the channel and not watch this.
Yeah.
All this faux outrage, man.
Yeah. My sense is that it's about power grab, because when people are anxious or ragey, they're relatively easy to manipulate and steer in a certain direction. This is where hellfire and brimstone sermons,
for sure.
Like that's what that is. It's generating anxiety, and then it's like, follow me, I'll give you the answer. It's like, oh please, give me the answer. Just protect me from the evil outsider, whatever the thing is. And
come with me.
Again, it's not a matter of the head, but the heart. Right?
Yeah.
I feel disgust, and so now I'm going to say something out loud about whatever it is, the Olympics or whatever.
Well, that's something that the guy that we're not naming out loud a whole lot, but that was something he is and was particularly good at, was seizing upon that sentiment and saying, okay, whatever. You can call it a zeitgeist if you want. I won't give it that gravitas. But seizing upon a moment, seizing upon a segment of the population that felt particularly rightly or wrongly disenfranchised, underrepresented, whatever, as though they were under attack. It's really strange that you think that you're under attack. Now you know how minorities have felt in this country for 400 years. But I see that there's that cartoon of the guy that says he's really upset because at the rate of population growth, at some point white people will not be the majority anymore. And it's like this guy's like, oh, so you think you'll be treated differently? Do you think that maybe, wait a minute, it's like, you're not seeing the irony of this. But let me ask you a question before I get too far. Sure. That was more of a soapbox. I get a pushback a lot. Here's my pushback, and I want you to help me define this. The pushback I get whenever I speak out against Christian nationalism is, maybe as you define it, blah, 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 blah. But they want to broadly define nationalism as basically patriotism and say that we're basically, what's the word I'm looking for when you misrepresent someone's argument? You
straw man?
Yeah, we're straw manning what nationalism is in order to critique that. I don't think so, but I'm curious, what would your sort of basic definition of nationalism be and Christian nationalism?
American Christian nationalism, as viewed through the missiological lens, which I'm trying to do as a missionary, is three things at the same time. It's a political ideology, a tribal identity, and a spiritual idolatry. As a political ideology, it is basically the argument that Christians should run the government to protect and propagate their way of being in the world. There's various, variations on the theme, but that's basically the root of the argument. Glad to talk more about that if you'd like. Second, it's tribal identity. It's a way to refer to an identifiable people group, just like missionaries do, in order to understand who they are, because they have identifiable taboos and dreams, origin story, cultural expectations. There's actually identifiable clothing and food and music. It's an identifiable people group within America. So tribal identity. And in this sense, it serves as a surrogate for ethnicity. Ethnos, which is actually the word nation when we translate it into English. Nation not being government or state, but rather identifiable people group. For instance, Raider Nation is not a state. It's a group of people.
What's a state of delusion? I
will leave that. Let the listener understand. The third thing is it's a spiritual idolatry, And it's two forms of idolatry at the same time. One is empire worship, where there is a veneration of the power of the state, the empire, usually economic and military prowess are venerated to some sort of divine or semi-divine status. For instance, a few weeks ago, a public figure, Ben Carson, said that the United States Constitution is divinely inspired. Okay, well, that's a veneration of an icon of Americana, putting it in some sort of semi-divine category. So, number one, empire worship. Number two, syncretism, which is kind of a weird technical term that basically means the syncing up of two different ideologies or belief systems. For instance, there's a version of syncretism which takes certain aspects of Christianity and merges it with certain aspects of the American civil religion. In many hymn books in America, there's songs like Amazing Grace or, The Rugged Cross. And then there's also a section that includes patriotic hymns like My Country 'Tis of Thee. And when they're synced up together, the human-centric thing actually gains kind of a divine weight to it, that the lived experience of the average person couldn't tell you the difference meaningfully between the two things. They're just all part of their Christianity. Here's a relatively innocuous expression of it. Santa Claus. So if you and I were celebrating the Christmas story in a different culture at a different time, like a non-European culture, they likely would not have a Santa Claus figure. But the Western Europeans had this Santa Claus figure and they synced it up with Christianity. So now we have Christmas where there's a nativity next to a Santa Claus figure that others who would recognize the nativity would be like, what is this person in a red suit doing in the Christmas stuff? So that's an expression of syncretism. In American Christian nationalism, you find this in iconography. For instance, my favorite current one is it's an American flag with Jesus, a Jesus-like figure with a crown of thorns, moving part of the flag aside to reveal an AR-15. And I'm still in the process of unpacking all of that means, but that's a syncretism, right? It's mixing iconography of Americana with iconography from the Christian tradition that elevates the human-centric stuff to a level of divine status.
Would it be fair to say then too that those things that are being syncretized are often really, if you dig into, they're at odds with one another? I mean,
yes, oftentimes.
I mean, the message of Jesus and the AR-15 could not be farther away from each other.
You got to do a lot of hermeneutical magic to get to the point that Jesus said
mental gymnastics.
Use violence. Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of verses you can take out of context that will. So my personal favorite is when I say that Jesus was nonviolent, and someone says, "Yeah, except he told his followers to buy swords." I'm like, you need reading comprehension.
I cover that part in my book in the field guide because I bump into it all the time too. And my recommendation to people is just read it in context.
Yeah. In the case
and
of
you
that
will
verse,
soon discover.
just read one more verse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In fact, I did a whole sermon series called "Just Keep Reading," and it was little Dory the fish going, "Just keep reading."
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and it was literally how many fragments of verses have we taken out and built theological structures about? For example, God can't look upon sin, and then that one doesn't even end with a period; it ends with a comma, because the next part of that sentence is, "So why do you?"
Yeah.
And then, so the violence thing is, go and buy swords. And in one version of that story, he says, "Okay, you have to. That should be enough." We can infer a lot from that. In another version of that story, he says, there's a little footnote added that he asked that, or he told to do that so that prophecy would be fulfilled, that he could be numbered among the transgressors. I'm like, all you have to do is actually do that thing. Bible 101 was what we always told people was at the very least, read the verse before and read the verse after. At the very least. I mean, preferably read the whole freaking chapter, but at least read the verse before, and at least read the verse after, and see if one explains the other. If you got somebody like Paul being sarcastic for God's sakes, and you can't pick up on sarcasm, or So there's all that stuff. But so the reason I bring it up is because I know that practically speaking, some of us want to go out and we don't want to be combative. Neither do we want to sit idly by while people we love are marginalized and threatened, and we see their rights eroded. If you have friends who are undocumented, if you have friends who are in the LGBTQ plus community, if you have any of those, if you have daughters and granddaughters, for God's sakes, there are things coming down the road that make me nervous for them. So I'm not going to sit here and not speak up, but I want to do it in a way that's productive and not just bomb throwing, because I can do that, no problem, easy peasy. Yeah. Nobody's minds are changed, but I'm hoping that a book like yours can give some tools that would help us have meaningful conversations with people who are interested in having meaningful conversations. Because I know that part's essential too. I know there's people on Facebook who don't care; they just want to say what they want to say and go. So practically speaking, that's why that definition is important to me, because I think oftentimes those words get thrown around and people don't have good working definitions, and they just get to say stuff. Well, it's just patriotism. Like, no, like, it's actually, it goes beyond simple love of country. I love my country. Gosh darn it, I don't really want to live anywhere else. Although, I don't know, Spain seems nice, but
yeah, C.S. Lewis has this. He in the book The Four Loves, he talks about patriotism as love for one's place and people and customs. He talks about like the love of the weather and the fondness you have for the beer. And it's not like tax code, military, judicial system like the state. It's about the nation, about the country, the people. And so he does this really wise articulation where he says, good patriotism does not need to think lower of other people who love their people as well. It's very similar to like my family and y'all's. So like I'm a Campbell. I love my family probably more, I guess, than I love your family. But I don't supremacize my family and say we're going to be in control of your family because I love my family more. So that's the distinction between patriotism, love for one's people, love for one's country, which I think is good. And nationalism in its current expression, especially religious nationalism, like Christian nationalism, is we're better than y'all. We need to be in charge. And so fundamentally, it's not actually about love for one's people. It's a supremacizing of one's people in order to dominate over others. Usually under the guise of self-preservation. We need to protect and propagate our own way of being from the imminent enemy.
Well, and hence that mythology that enters in that we're under attack. Right.
And that anxiety about ethnic erasure is what's constantly being stirred up. And that's why I think it's so important to recognize this problem is not in the logic center of our being. It's not in the brain. It's in the heart. And so any conversation that's going to move forward, we first have to address the needs of safety, belonging, and purpose, because that person is feeling anxious that their way of being in the world is under imminent threat, which is terrifying, by the way. You and I know ethnic erasure is a real thing. There really have been times in recent history, lived memory for some of us, where entire people groups have sought to erase other people groups. So that's a real thing. And it's that anxiety that's stirring up. But the question is this a legitimate threat? Or is this just an anxiety that's being stirred up by people who want your money and power? And so when we're talking with people who are stirred up about, the enemy at the gates, whoever that might be, or the so-and-so agenda, first, by practicing hospitality in the way of Jesus, we can be calm conversation partners and model for them how we can actually have a conversation. We don't want to meet their rage with rage. We don't want to meet their anxiety with anxiety. And one of the ways we can do that, and this is some of the difficult stuff that I propose in the work, we can do our darndest to find the value that's underneath the thing they said and honor the value. So they say something that just sounds like xenophobic hate speech in my ears. I might say, oh man, that sounds scary, right? Feeling. When you hear that, what are you feeling? Oh, I'm so afraid. Tell me more about that. What are you afraid for? I'm not hearing the same things you're hearing about that invading army or whatever, but I want to know, what are you fearing? Oh, I'm just so scared for little Johnny and Sally that they're going to not grow up in a safe place, that they're going to be inculcated with messaging that tells them to hate their country, and that they're going to be they're going to be sexually assaulted in the bathroom. I'm just terrified. Pause. Right there, I can connect on a value. I also want safety for little Johnny and Sally. I want them protected from those things. I want them to love their country. I think our government should do its work to protect safe space for little Johnny and Sally. I'm with you. I love that you love them so much that you're willing to care. I honor you for that. Now, TV timeout. I'm not lying. And it takes a lot of work to get in the space where I actually can honor somebody, even if I think the thing they said was outrageous. But by connecting on the values and connecting at the heart level, what I'm trying to show is, at the end, I'm not your enemy. The people who are stirring up, fear-mongering, they're telling you I'm your enemy. I'm not your enemy. I'm not here to do you harm. I'm your cousin. I'm your nephew. I'm your brother. I'm your, whatever it might be. I'm your friend. And then through humble subversion, and this is where I think you can actually start doing work. If a person now, if they're at a space through hospitality, they feel safe with you, you can actually introduce conversations that they engage in humble subversion. And the way I might do it is, all that stuff you were saying about the invading army and, I honor you, about the core value, et cetera, et cetera. I also want our government to keep us safe from enemies that might want to do us harm. I want that. And I want to do everything I can to make sure that I'm supporting that. And at the same time, I've been reading my Bible lately. And all throughout the Bible is this thing that says like this. It says, care for the widow, the poor, the immigrant, and the orphan. It says to people who have means, like wealthy people, like I think me, because I have a car, to do what I can to help take care of people who are on the margins. And I feel a tension in my own heart. How do I work to create a safe space for little Johnny and Sally and honor this radical teaching of Scripture, teaching of Jesus, to love the foreigner? And I feel a tension. What do you think? And all I'm trying to do is show that inside of their being are two values that are held in tension with each other. Value for safety for our future, and the value to honor the teachings of Jesus on whatever the issue might be. And I'm simply trying to get them to re-engage with the teachings of Jesus because they say they follow Jesus. And I can argue till I'm blue in the face about facts and opinions, but if they don't feel safe with me, they're not going to listen about that. And moreover, I don't think I can change their mind. What I want them to do is meditate on how the teachings of Jesus might want to change that mind. And if I've practiced hospitality, if I've honored the good, if I've connected on values, if I've avoided presenting myself as an enemy, then 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades from now, when they're standing at the kitchen sink having a cup of coffee with newsertainment blaring hate speech on the TV in the living room, all of a sudden it hits them. And they realize, oh, I don't think that this is congruent. That inside of me, these two things that I hold valuable, they're not jiving. Like my anti-immigrant rhetoric or whatever the thing is, and the teachings of Jesus. And this is where I think why hospitality is so important. They ask themselves the question, I feel a tension inside of my heart. Who can I talk to? And if I've presented myself as a healthy conversation partner, as a friend and not an enemy, my hope is that they would think of me. Because they can't, and here's the deal, they can't go to their American Christian nationalist buddies and ask critical questions about the movement because you will be excused from the communion. You will be removed from safety, belonging, and purpose, which is terrifying. It's why so many people find logic to make sense of the things coming out of their mouth that they might otherwise disagree with, because if they say something contrary, they will be excommunicated. And many of us know what that feels like, to be removed from a community because of something that we think or said out loud or the wrong question that we asked. And people are generally speaking willing to go along with whatever the group's saying so I can stay a part of the group. But if I've practiced hospitality and maybe I'm part of a community that practices hospitality, like the local church, then there would be a place for me to land if I start asking questions about what's going on in my heart.
Good stuff. I mean, it mirrors for me in a lot of ways, John and Bethany, maybe you guys could chime in. Does that not mirror for you kind of the deconstruction path as well, though? Like, as you're leaving and as you're critiquing, if you haven't left space for people who haven't come along with you, I've had this experience. What you just described, I've had this experience with deconstruction where I've had people who 3 or 4 years ago wrote me off as a heretic and a scumbag and a traitor to the faith. They are routinely reaching out to me now because they're having their own crises of faith. And they're remembering that I was not an asshole and that I actually engaged with them. And they're like, so I get Facebook messages at least once or twice a month. And they're asking hard questions. Well, who can they ask? And so I wrote in my own book that was key for me. And I didn't use the word hospitality. I should have. But I did say, essentially, if you burn all these bridges on your way out the door, where will they go? When their moment of crisis comes, who are they going to talk to about it? They're either going to stay put or they're going to go out on their own like you did and suffer the slings and arrows of being alone like we all felt. And that's terrifying too. So I didn't have many people I could reach out to and talk to about the stuff I was feeling unsure about. It was very isolating and very lonely at times. And so, yeah, I resonate with all of that. I will say this, that everything you've said, I 100% believe is true. I also think it's hard as hell.
Oh, yeah, dude. Like, I hate this stuff.
like, if I'm being honest,
that's why I wrote a book. So you guys can all do it. I'm just going to sit here and, enjoy.
I don't want to do any of it. You know what I mean? Much easier just to go, you know what? You and you, we don't have to talk anymore. And I think I think it's too easy, but I think that's too easy. It's too easy to become glib about relationships and fall victim to the same kind of thinking that we're accusing other people of having. So while they're writing us off, we're returning the favor. That can't be the answer. It can't possibly be. Or we're just two sides of the same coin or two wings on the same running bird. I don't know how you want to, whatever metaphor you want to use, but so I like this, but it is challenging. And I
all right, I'm gonna give you the prayer that I hate.
Oh, fun.
All right, you ready for this? Lord, what do you want to change in me through them?
Yikes. Yeah, you're right. I hate that.
Yep. So the reason that I even dare to speak it out loud here is if I'm not in a position to be willing to also change, I either think too highly of myself or too low of them. And that's not, as grandma used to say, all ground is equal at the foot of the cross. We're just one beggar trying to help another beggar where to find bread. And if I come in as a superior, I'm supremacizing my own way of being in the world. And so that prayer for me has been a humbling exercise with the expectation that I still have a lot to change that I can't see, but it's miserable.
Yeah. But that change you're talking about is necessarily, I think, unless you're just really good at this, but it's got to be a one-on-one thing. It's got to be
almost always.
I mean, you're not going to change people in mass, but I'm reminded of the guy whose name I now forget, but who decided it was his mission in life to convert Klansmen, and so the African American guy goes out of his way to meet, befriend, and eventually win over, and he does with remarkable proficiency. But it takes a long time, and it's a one at a time and a one at a time, and it's not without risk and it's not without pain and peril. But this kind of meeting of the minds that you're describing has got to be predicated on relationship. None of this happens by one of us shouting into the void, racist, go home. That's just, it doesn't work that way. So, it's the beauty of it. It's the challenge of it. It's also what makes a lot of people go, well, maybe. So it's, I don't know. I'm rambling now, John. Save me.
I don't have a lot more to add. I think it's been an amazing conversation, though.
Oh gosh, we're already over an hour. Damn it.
Yeah,
we could keep going.
Yeah, we really could. I mean, I just agree with Nat. I mean, this is can be life altering. It can be a life altering experience for you and for the person that you're sitting down and having this conversation with. And I think I just want to applaud you for showing us what I think is a better way. I think Nat and I have both spent many an hour the other way, tilting at windmills, yelling and screaming and not changing anybody's mind and just getting mad, and in turn making the other people mad, and like Nat said, have changed 0 minds, 0. So I applaud you for taking the tougher road and showing us a better way.
Yeah, I think that we are called to be people of peace and to be people that are safe. And, just like Nat was saying, people reach out to him all the time. It happens so often to me too. And I'm sure it happens for you too, Caleb, where people that are curious, they are just wondering how to have those sorts of conversations with the people that they love, and they just don't know how to engage with them any longer. They know that they can come to you even just to listen to them and hear them without condemning them in any way or belittling them in any way. And I think oftentimes, especially as Christians, we come into conversations on the defense, like we're ready with like our arms up, ready to fight and defend whatever it is that we need to defend. And I think what I see through Christ is just this invitation to engage with curiosity. But yeah, that sense of like engaging with curiosity and being sent into the spaces to look for people of peace who are wanting to engage in that way.
Yeah, 100%. Man, I tell you what, it's been awesome. The book again is Disarming Leviathan. It is available wherever fine books are sold. Go out and buy a copy or 2 or 3. Have a study group at your church. Really, honestly, I think that as I leaf through that book would lend itself very well to like a small group discussion, a Bible study kind of thing, where people. Because here's the thing: these conversations that we have in places like Facebook and whatever, they turn into a dumpster fire every single time, because people behind the keyboards are fearless, and 99 times out of 100, face to face, they'd never say those things to you. Some of them, of course, would, because they're terrible. But most people are decent. And if you sit across from one another and break bread and have a meal and share a cup of coffee or something, and you can rationally discuss some of these really hard topics, I think, man, that's a powerful way to do this. So that's my recommendation is take some of this, read this book, take it to heart, take it into your spaces, internalize some of the messages here. Because at the end of the day, all we're talking about is living out the words of Jesus. Pretty sure that's what we were called to do. And I don't know, maybe I misread. I'll go back and read my Gospels and see if that's still relevant. But we appreciate you guys. Hey, thank you again, Caleb, so much. Awesome book. Man, appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.